Members of the chapter, welcome on in. This is your channel master Spoos and Studs, and this comparison is actually a very interesting one in that it was inspired by me buying the re-release of the Space Wolves Claw Pack. And I had commented in that there were some slight differences in the construction of the Claw Pack, as well as the differences in the shading versus the OG one and the new one. So that kind of got me thinking, why don't I buy another action figure and compare the OG one versus the re-release one? So in this one, we are going to be taking a look at the OG Space Wolves Bladeguard versus the new re-released Space Wolves Bladeguard and see if there are some differences that we can glean. So let's jump right on in. Alright, straight up is that the re-released figure does come with a base. This guy, because he's a first edition one, did not come with a base back in the day. I'll just say on a first cursory glance that there actually is a size difference, which is very surprising to me. The first version right here on the left hand side is shorter than the one on the right hand side, which is the new one that got released. And if we take a look at the back, it would appear that the thigh area on the re-release is actually longer than the one on the left-hand side. So on version 1, you have a flat red lens. There is a decent amount of shading that's happening all throughout this action figure. But as I'm picking up this re-release over here, you can see that the shading is a lot less pronounced, and weirdly enough, if you take a look closely, the lenses are actually red metallic instead of the flat red, so at least that part is upgraded. But there unfortunately seems to be a significant downgrade from the shading that's happening that we also saw in the re-release of the Claw Pack. So side by side, the design of the pauldron did not change. However, it appears that the forearms of the re-release are actually longer than the original Space Marine. And obviously the hands are the version 1 hands that you see on the original one versus the hands over here, which is the V2 one. Now we will take a look at the pauldron construction, and this one appears to have the good old ball and socket joint here. And then this one I'm going to assume also has the same ball and socket joint, and yes, it does. So that construction did not change. So if we flip on this side, there doesn't really appear to be too much of a noticeable difference, except that once again, this forearm area, there is 5 studs, whereas there's only 2 studs on this side. So that's yet another subtle change that happened. Now, as we are looking at the chest area of this action figure, we can see that there is actually a design change with how the heraldic shield is put on. So here, the heraldic shield has like an attachment on the re-release, while as this one, the heraldic shield kind of is just buried in the front of this action figure. Now, the other thing that I'm going to say is that just by cursory glance, there is a difference between this wing skull versus this wing skull over here. And this wing skull actually has a crown over it, while this one is completely unadorned. The re-release seems to have a kind of longer area in which to attach the backpack. So as you can see here, there's like the silver tab, whereas this part does not. You can clearly see the elongated area to attach the backpack versus this one is very short. The original one, the holes are a little bit bigger than the re-release. The vents are pretty much the same on both of the Space Marines, except this one does not have any shading whatsoever. And as we move on down, the tabard area seems to be a little bit different too, where this Space Marine looks like it has a larger tabard area than this one. And then as we move on down to the waist area, you've got the same amulet that's hanging down. It appears that the power sword and scabbard are almost completely the same. There doesn't appear to be any difference between the side armor plates. This is the re-released empty holster, and if we put it side by side to each other, it doesn't seem like there is that much of a difference. I will, however, point out to you that the pouches on the original release actually do have highlights right here, and then compared to the re-release ones do not have any kind of highlighting on them. So lifting up the tabard area, it looks fairly similar. There is this interesting notch right here. I'm not exactly sure why it's there. There's no notch on the original release on my left-hand side. And then taking a look at the knee area, there is actually a difference between the designs here of the skulls. So you have a more pronounced skull on this one over here with more defined teeth. There is also a redesign of the knee area front plates here, where it appears that the triangles here are smaller and then they're actually more widespread. So these are just very interesting subtle differences that are occurring all throughout these action figures re-release here. Another thing that you will notice too, when you're looking at the legs of this action figure, this guy has a completely different part versus the thighs of this one. And then down here, the back of the legs are completely different in that there is sort of a vent patterning here. There's no vents on this one. There seems to be like a little notch on this part, whereas this part does not have that notch. And when you're looking at the back of the re-release, this part is actually a raised area, whereas this one is a sunken area. And then interestingly enough, the feet on the re-release are actually bigger than the feet of the original ones. So it appears that there is some weird sort of size creep that's happening too, which is very surprising to me. Now let's take a look at the power sword of this action figure. So it looks like the power swords are completely the same. There's really no differences in terms of the painting as well as the design. So next we are going to move on to see if there's any differences between the accessories of these two action figures. All right, left hand side OG accessories, right hand side the new accessories. Let's start off with the top as usual and take a look at the backpack and see what differences we can glean off of it. So I have to say at cursory glance, it doesn't seem like there's too much of a difference, except that this part is shaded a little bit deeper than this. You can see the bronze a little bit more. And then as we progress on down, the wolf's heads are completely the same. That replaces the vents. There's just a little bit more shading on this vent area. However, the marked difference actually is this backpack has a glowing blue metallic gem. This one just has a plain bronze area. We flip around to the other side. We do see that this part is more heavily shaded versus this one. Let's take a look at the shields. And I would have to say that the shields are pretty much similar. The re-release Bladeguard Veteran seems to have a darker shield patterning here. If we flip around to the other side, it appears that there's really no appreciable differences in my opinion. Now we're going to take a look at the plasma pistols of the both action figures, and from cursory glance there really isn't any difference whatsoever. Flip around to the other side, it's pretty much the same. Now I'll have to say the wolf pelts look pretty much similar to me. I mean, there's some variations in the spray painting and coloring pattern of the pelt. So that is the in-depth side-by-side comparison of these two action figures. Let me wrap this up with what really surprised me about these action figures. So I will have to admit to you that there were a few differences that was kind of expecting, and quite a few that I was actually not really expecting at all. So the things that we're really expecting was basically that the shading on the OG one was going to be more pronounced than on the new one. And I say that because I have reviewed both new and old ones, and the old ones always seem to have a lot more shading. So that did not really take me by surprise. The pauldrons having the same construction didn't take me by surprise either, as well as the hands are going to be clearly different. However, the biggest thing that I really did not expect was that there is a size difference between the new Bladeguard versus the old Bladeguard. I thought that they would have the same body construction, and I was completely caught off guard. The thigh area on the new one is actually longer than the thigh area on the OG one, and there's some subtle differences too with how the legs are constructed. Another thing too is that the chest regions on these action figures are completely different too, with the different designs, as well as the different area on the back where the backpack attaches. I was not expecting that either. And the final thing that kind of threw me off too was that the forearm section on the new one is actually longer than the old too. So I don't really know exactly why these changes are happening with the re-releases, because I thought literally the re-release are just going to be faithful copies of the old ones, But clearly from just this review right here, we can tell that that is really not the case. JoyToy has been making subtle changes and tweaks in the background that we do not really know. So it kind of makes me wonder exactly with these re-released action figures, what they have been doing in the background. And I suppose there's only really one way to find out, which is, once again, buy a new one and compare the old one. So anyways, members of the chapter, I do hope you enjoyed this side-by-side comparison. I really like to see what the differences are with these action figures that occur over time. And if you're actually interested in picking up this particular action figure as well as the re-released Bladeguard, just click on the link in the description below, or you'll be brought to David Toys. That's where I get the majority, if not all, of my action figures. And the reason why is that I have never had an issue with them whatsoever. They provide excellent customer service. And when you check out, do not forget to use the code SNS to receive 12% off of your purchase. And once again, with that being said, I will see you all in the next one.